Good evening. Good evening, everyone. Ladies and gentlemen, colleagues and friends, I'm Clement Onn, Director of the Asian Civilization Museum and the Peranakan Museum, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you to ACM today. We are exceptionally honored to have with us today Mr. Emmanuel Kasarhérou, who has traveled all the way from Paris to join us here in Singapore. Mr. Kasarhérou is the president of the Musée du quai Branly, a position that he has held since May 2020. He has previously served as the director of New Caledonia, dedicated to the Kanak culture and the wider Pacific region. In 1994, he joined the agency for the development of Kanak culture as cultural director, overseeing the development of the Tijbao Cultural Center, which was opened in 1998, and later served as the general manager from 2006 to 2011. He joined quai Branly in 2011, where he curated the exhibition Kanak, Les Arts de Est in Parole, and served as a senior curator and deputy director for heritage and collections before his appointment to president. And I would also just like to put a word to say that, the Musée du quai Branly and the Asian Civilization Museum have a very long relationship. We had our first collaboration and exchanges of exhibition around 2010, 2011. I was already here as a very junior curator. And this friendship between the two museums was established by then the founding director, Dr. Kenson Kwok, and Deputy Director Tan Hui Sim, together with then President President Stefan Martin of the Musée du quai Branly, and has been continuing ever since. So if you look back, it is more than 15 years of friendship with the Musée du quai Branly, and also the very first French museum for ACM and the Peranakan Museum to have our exhibition to be hosted in Paris. So, to celebrate this friendship that we have, confident that we are in for an enlightening presentation this evening, and I very much anticipate the engaging discussion that will follow with Emmanuel. So without much further delay, let me please join me to give a very warm welcome to Mr. Emmanuel Kasarhérou.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for coming tonight to this conference. I'm very happy to be here and happy to renew this long relationship between the Musée du quai Branly Jacques Chirac in Paris and the Asian Civilization Museum here in Singapore. I would like to tell you a bit about our collection of this museum in Paris. And I'd like to follow the idea that museum objects are not static things. They move, they are objects in motion. They move across time, they move across geographies, they move across system of meaning, and they are collected, classified, exhibited, admired, and contested sometimes, and sometimes forgotten, and sometimes reclaimed. Each time they move, their status changes from ritual objects to ethnographic specimen, from colonial acquisition to work of art, from museum collection to subject of restitution or renewed dialogue. The Musée du quai Branly Jacques Chirac was created 20 years ago at that precise time of tension in Europe between this question of what will be the future of ethnography museum, of colonial museum, of all these sometimes very old collection we take care in our museum. Following this, I would like to give you some information about the history of this collection. As I mentioned to you, it's a young museum because we opened to the public 20 years ago only. This is our 20th anniversary today, this year. Yet the collection are very old, and nearly more than 450 years now for the first objects which came to Europe. And the collection is a history of accumulation, curiosity, scientific inquiry, colonial expansion, and artistic fascination. And as early as the 16th century, André Tevet, this guy, his portrait on my back, was appointed by the King of France, Henry II, as a cosmographer to the king. His role was to travel the world and to bring back objects, history, plants, anything which can be of interest from the Middle East to Africa to the Americas. And he was the first to travel to South America. That was in 1556. This early collection speaks of a desire to understand the world, but also already of an urge to classify the world and over time to exert control over it. In the 17th century, the Jardin du Roi in Paris, the King's Garden, became another key site where knowledge of distant lands, people, plants, animals, material were gathered. From the outside, the outset, objects, nature, and human cultures were inseparable in European system of knowledge. I go on with the historical, the history of institution, because there's many aspects of it, but I will focus on the former museum before the Musée du quai Branly. In 1878, the Trocadéro Museum of Ethnography in Paris was established and opened to the public. And in 1938, it became the Musée de l'Homme, which maybe you haven't been heard of it, shaped by anthropology and humanist idea. At the same time, another lineage of collection developed through colonial institutions. The Colonial Museum, later the Musée de l'Histoire, the Musée des Territoires d'Outre-mer, then the Museum of African and Oceanic Arts, and finally National Museum of African and Oceanic Arts. And all these two origin of collection merged in 2003 in this new institution named the Quai Branly Museum, where we gathered we merged a collection of more than 200,000 objects. And sometime with information, sometime with no a clue of information where it comes from, or where it arrived in France. Objects then thus moved again from colonial display to ethnographic science, from anthropology to a museum explicitly dedicated to dialogue between cultures. You have another view here of this colonial museum with French officials and military person, and then the different display. The main change came not from museum, but from artists, and artists displaced the gaze. This started with at the end of the 19th century, and with people, artists like Paul Gauguin. His experience in Polynesia marks an early and influential moment in the appreciation of the objects already in collection or the object who will be coming to the collection. His work reveals the fascination, appropriation, and projection all at once. A few years later, artists such as Pablo Picasso, alongside poets like Guillaume Apollinaire and painters like André Derain or Henri Matisse, collected what they called at that time Negro art, de l'art nègre. They put together everything from Africa, America, from anywhere in the world, but mainly from Africa. These objects profoundly transform European modern art, even as their original meanings were often misunderstood or simply erased. Picasso's lifelong relationship with some of the objects as shown on this picture. You see two Canac objects photographed with Pablo Picasso in 1905, I remember, I think. And then the two of them at the Picasso National Museum in Paris today. We have another illustration with his famous Marquesas Island from the Pacific, Tiki, with Guillaume Apollinaire here in Picasso atelier in the early 20th century, and then Picasso in the 1960s with the same object, which is now at the National Museum of Picasso in Paris. The collection today of the museum is about 370, I guess, 1,000 objects. I'm only talking about objects, not about photographs. There's many of them, and with books also more than 1 million of objects. So it's a huge collection and not always easy to give access to all of these objects because of the number of objects. And sometimes I know that people can be frustrated by saying you have so many objects, it's not possible to see one of it. Yes, it's possible, but you have to unlist and wait for the time you will be able to have access to them. The collections today, yes, so we have objects from Africa, the Americas, Asia, Oceania, North Africa, and Middle East. Only a small number of them are displayed at the museum. If you come to the museum, you will be able to see about 3,400 objects at the same time, and it represents less than 1% of the total of the collection. This imbalance forces us to confront fundamental question: what is to be shown, what remains unseen, what to decide, and who decides. So objects continue to move between storage and display, between research and exhibition, between silence and renewed attention. The founding principle of this museum was to establish an equal dignity between these different civilizations, where it used to be in the former museum classified from low to up. From its inception, the Musée du quai Branly was grounded in a strong ethical principle. At its inauguration in 2006, President Chirac affirmed that there is no hierarchy between cultures, just as there is no hierarchy between peoples. This principle, the equal dignity of culture, is demanding. It challenges museums to rethink authority, voice, and narrative. In 2016, the Musée du quai Branly became the Musée du quai Branly Jacques Chirac. This is a full quotation of President Chirac, which is still the baseline of our work today, how we try to develop from this strong founding idea. So to found a new museum with a new vision in Paris needed also a new architecture. The architecture of the museum express this philosophy. Designed by Jean Nouvel, the famous architect who built so many museums around the world, like the Abu Dhabi Museum and so many others in Qatar and so on. The building avoids monumentality, and it's in the real heart of Paris, nearby the Eiffel Tower. Instead, the museum emphasizes circulation, permeability, and encounter. Permeability between what is the building and the garden, and there is many permeability between both. Gardens, glass, facades, and living walls blur the boundary between inside and outside. You see the vertical wall of the museum with living plants. Even the ceiling were painted by Aboriginal artists from Australia. Some of them can be only seen when you climb up the Eiffel Tower, because it's on the top of the museum, and you can't see it when you are in a museum. You have to go to the Eiffel Tower to see it. So this idea of having the Aboriginal painters from Australia to be really part of the architecture was a very strong also idea from Jean Nouvel, to liaise between the past and today artwork and artists. Architecture is not simply a container here. It is part of the narrative. Some of the view of the museum during the night. So the museum is not only a museum, it's also a place for performing arts and other activities, just like this museum here. The Musée du quai Branly, it's a place of knowledge and exchange. And we have a research library which preserves more than 1 million books, archives, and images. We have a theater, like here, 400 seats, where we have different conferences, music, dance, and performances, allowing practices to respond to historical collection. It's important to us also to remind the audience coming to the museums that sometimes when you go to the museum, you get out from the museum thinking that culture is only about objects, but objects is very it's just a very narrow vision of what is culture, and performing arts and all the living culture. The cultural heritage is much bigger than that if you consider singing, poetry, dance, and all this kind of intangible aspect of cultural heritage. Again, objects can move again from showcase to voices, from archives to bodies. One very specific thing about this museum is the idea that you don't enclose the narrative into boxes, but it's a very open museography, as you can see in this vision from the top of these semi-permanent gallery, which occupies about 8,000 square meters on a single open platform. So you can go from the Pacific to Africa very easily And the idea is that when the audience comes to a museum, they don't want to be always lectured. They want also to create their own vision of an imaginary museum, because when they come to the museum, they already have a lot of knowledge, in fact, and they will bring it with them, and they will redevelop their imagination by being able to go from one, to switch from one to another. There's no close narrative, but the objects are presented according to geographical broad um, um, uh, areas, and we know we don't follow any chronological narrative. So it's a way to keep the museum open to many different kind of interpretation from the visitor. But we keep a very strong effort to replace part of these 3,000 objects on display, and we change about 15% of them every year, which is a big work, but it's also a very important work to be done, so you can rotate the objects and be able to show as many as we can. Temporary exhibition is a very important part of our activities. Since the inception, since its inception, about 1/3 of the museum's public space has been devoted to temporary exhibition. We have the facility to design a different exhibition with different facilities. For us, the temporary exhibition is a kind of central part of the museum, because it's a living part of the museum, much more living than the semi-permanent I was talking about a few minutes later, before. They are where we can experiment, where we test new ideas, innovative ideas, and where we look at the collections differently. They allow us to revisit difficult histories and to engage directly with contemporary debates. You have here a selection of different exhibitions. We recently produced an exhibition about an expedition, French expedition, scientific expedition to Africa in the 1930s. And this expedition was very controversial. There was a lot of controversy about this expedition, because it was during the colonial period, and they use very much the colonial system to achieve their scientific goals. And we developed an expedition and exhibition with this on this theme. And you have here the curatorial team of 12 people, 6 from Europe, 6 from Africa. There's the colleagues from Africa were museum director of National Museum in Africa, where this expedition went in the 1930s. And it was a very, very important work and scientific project developed over 4 years. Each year, we produce around 9 to 10 exhibitions for the use, for our own purpose, from smaller formats of about 100 square meters to major exhibition up to 2,000 square meters. And we circulate 6 to 7 exhibitions worldwide. You have here a few images of a recent exhibition. One here in Seoul, which was last year, and this one, which is still on in in Chengdu in China. That's one of the main questions you have to face when you run this kind of institution in Europe, is the question of restitution, which is closely linked with the question of provenance. Where do all these objects came from, and how did they get to France? It's an easy question and a very, very difficult answer to make, because you have to go through very deep research, because as I mentioned to you, the collection is very old, and this question wasn't so much of the interest of the people who brought the collection to France at the time. So it's a very, very unusual one. We are very lucky to find some information about them, but it's usually we find more information about the object when it came into European hands, but very difficult to see how they came to European hands. Before that, it's a kind of glass wall. But still, we're pursuing this provenance research, and this has became very central to our activities today. And this work leads sometimes to restitution. We had this restitution made at the Musée du quai Branly in 2012, or of 20 different toimoko, which means tattooed head from Maori, from New Zealand, Aotearoa, New Zealand, which were from different national collection in France and were restituted at that time by the French Republic to New Zealand, Aotearoa. And you see here the French Minister of Culture making the hongi, the traditional salutation, with the Maori leader. Another important event in the last recent years of the museum was in 2021, when 26 works from the Royal Treasury of Abomey is now in the Republic of Benin. These works were taken in 1892 by a French colonel who was the head of the military expedition against the kingdom of Dahomey. And he decided to brought back to France some of the treasure which has been buried by the king before he flee from his palace. And he unburied them, he digged for them, and then brought them back to France. So this was given back to you see the French president here, the pieces on the back, and this is the president of Republic of Benin. And these pieces were given back in 2021. These acts are not endings. They are a moment of a longer process of relationships building. And we still have a lot of contacts between the Benin colleagues and us, because they also, on their side, built and rebuilt new museums for this cultural heritage, but also for the others who are still in their country. Today, research increasingly involves communities of origin as partners. We have delegations coming from different places of the world. Here, I give you only an example of a delegation coming to us from Amazonia. And these people are from the Buibororo community in Amazonia. And they came last year to work on a very important collection we have on this place, because French explorer went to Amazonia in the late of the 18th century, and we have objects from 18th, 19th, and 20th century from their place. And one of the famous collectors in this community was Claude Lévi-Strauss, who went to Amazonia in the 1930s. At the conclusion, let me conclude by returning to my guiding thread for this talk. Objects never stop moving. They move physically, symbolically, and politically. When museums acknowledge this movement, they themselves must change. The Musée du quai Branly Jacques Chirac seeks to be a museum that moves with its objects, from authority to responsibility, from possession to relationship, from a single voice to shared narratives. Its role is not to close histories, but to keep them open, visible, and open to debate. If there is one idea I would like you to retain today, it's that the museum today is not defined by what it owns, but by how it engages with the lived memories and futures carried by its collection. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Emmanuel, for your very expansive introduction to the Musée du quai Branly, and you managed to do it within like half an hour. That's really impressive. I think I was going to ask you, for the core purpose of quai Branly, and how has that purpose evolved in recent years? But you have kind of covered in your talk already. You use the word museums of civilization, and the ACM is also, well, Asian Civilization Museum. I always find that it's quite a mouthful to say, but museums of civilization can mean many things. And in today, in 2026, what should that term stand for? And then what should we avoid, or perhaps not avoid? Any kind of thoughts from you, kind of reflecting between either with Musée du quai Branly or to museums of our nature.
Yeah, civilization is it's a word with a lot of a long history already, and sometimes they were used as a kind of upper class of culture. You have cultures on the bottom, and then you have civilization, and then you have the best civilization, which is the guy who leading the museum and and having the collection. Today, I think it's good to reuse this terminology, but with changing this conception and have it much more, instead of having it vertically, having it horizontally, including all kind of human creation of society and any production made by human society. I think it's a term which has to be reforged, and but I like it, and I like the way you have it for this museum.
Thank you. And I think that is also something of a shared philosophy that both our institution have. The other very common perception for museums like ours, people too tend to think that is it too old-fashioned, too much, old things, works of art that what does it have to do with us today? What are this kind of, because every time when I'm in Paris, I notice that your demographics are also very young. So what kind of strategic direction do you set that you maintain that public interest, especially also the youth in your museum?
There are different strategy according to what we understand from the audience what they want.
Mm.
And it's not easy because it's unspoken most of the time. You have to feel it, breathe it, and try to guess what will be the best thing to do. I guess for the what I call the semi-permanent exhibition with about 3,000 objects, like the one you have here, the best what we developed these two for last years is to incorporate much more history when we know where the object comes from and what the history of this particular object. We can't do it with all the objects, as I mentioned, because sometimes we don't really know, and there's no clue even by making a lot of research, we don't find any clue of it. But when we know it, it's important to explain the history of the object. So we developed 2 years ago for this kind of object a tour. That's the people who are interested in can follow this mark on specific objects, and they can have an idea of how these objects came for the one we know. So it's just a bit of light on a very big black situation for most of the object, but still it's there. We have work on them, and it's something they can follow, and they can be sure that this is our knowledge today. Doesn't mean it's a knowledge forever. This is a knowledge we have today. The other thing is that, as mentioned, I'm very interested in this museum of open the mind of the visitors that this is not a closed vision of culture. You must remind that behind the objects, there's a vision of the world, there's a language, and each language, the 5,000 or bit more human language of the world, are very unique, and they are a creation of art by itself, because it's always a specific vision of how to be human, how to interact with what we see, with what we can't see, with what we dream of, with what we have fear of, and that's why we incorporate in the museum some sound. That was a very difficult task because we don't want to overwhelm the visitor with too much sound, because sometimes you can be fed up with sound, too much sound. So we try to work with each region. We wanted to have this sound with colleagues or local communities, just to remind then, when you come to a museum, you come with your own language, your own experience, your own idea of what the museum should be, and your own expectation expectation, but also with your own history of sound, of relation of one human being to sound, because one typical bird, just by hearing it, some of people here will say, "Well, this is my home." If you hear some typical kind of sound, natural sound, which we call natural, in fact, they're already cultural. So we also have this kind of sensitivity. We are trying to revive, and to the visitors, saying that you can see by your eyes, but see also with and remember that you can learn a lot of things by hearing, or remember what you have heard before when you were young, and so in different experiences you have. So we have now a different place in the museum where you can hear sometime things you can't really know what it is, but if you are from the region, maybe it will ring you a bell and it will remind you of something.
You touch on the that whole sonic experience, and I really taken to that point, because that is also something that I learned a lot when visiting Quai Branly as well, and that also translate to some of the kind of directions of the works that we try to do at the ACM. with the elegant sound using this Chinese instrument, to inspire people to think about, what does the instrument sound like? Because most of the time, I mean, a museum of musical instrument is often difficult because you see this instrument sort of all locked up and displayed nicely in the showcase, but you do not know how that sound, giving the very nature for them is to make music, is to sound. And likewise, like you said, that experience of hearing, whether is it nature or is it the birds, is the part of that cultural context, which is also why in the show of Asian Games Let's Play, we have this ASMR component. That imagine you are walking into a chess club or a go salon, and these are the sounds that you are being surrounded. So very often, it's part of us, but it's the easiest thing that we forget because it's not so visible. And how do you translate and bring up all this experience to the audience? I find that it's easier said than done, and have to do it very sensitively as well.
Yeah, it's not so easy to do it. It took us 3 years to to experiment and to see how to do it. And but it's an interesting thing. I think it's it's not part of a mission, traditional mission of a museum, but I think it is today part of a mission also because we can have place for performing arts like that, with musician coming. But sound is much more than music.
Yep.
It's something which can touch yourself very, very deeply,
Yep.
and maybe create by your visit in a museum a new idea, a new something new you want to explore. And I hope that museum will develop this. Uh, this is a basic way to do it. We try to do it in other ways by creating. We created 4 years ago, 5 years ago, a grant for sound designers
Mm.
from everywhere in the world except Europe.
Oh.
We want people to have an experience of being human, not through the eye of Europe or Western. And that's very, very, very interesting because it's a way also to help us to find new ways
Mm.
to address this question because we are not museum are not traditionally open to this. So we have to innovate. We have to find new ways, and maybe the best way is to try to provoke with sound designer. Sometime work for musicians. Sometimes they work for different things for films, but for a while they will just try to create something unique and new.
And is this program still continuing?
Yeah,
That's
with yeah,
fantastic.
yeah, 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 yeah.
And
The first, I can, there is one, the first lady who won this grant was from Lebanon, and she came to the museum with these ideas that you mentioned the collection of objects. We have the museum, the quai Branly, a big column of objects, 9,000 objects from all over the world, and they are all musical instruments. And her idea was even if they are still, they may produce some vibration. We can't hear with our ear, but maybe some new technology can help us to hear more than what our ear used to be. And in fact, she put microphone all over this big column of these instruments of about 4 different stages. And every musical instrument produces sound, which is not the sound they will produce when a human being is biting them or if is blowing in them. But it's a very interesting kind of vision of this object who is supposed to be still.
Yeah.
In fact, not. There's a vibration. You don't know because there's small air coming in. There's vibration from everything.
Or even like us walking around the
That's
museum,
right.
the
That's
vibration
right.
caused that. I remember now you mention it. I remember I was having this conversation with Chicha as well, and you shared with me the same story. So there is that as well, which is is again is there. The vibration is there. The instrument does make some sound. but in a hertz level that as human we can't perceive it. So that's also a very poetic touch to it. Maybe we can turn it to the audience if you have any questions for Emmanuel or for me. Or yes, can I get well? Just wait for the microphone to come to you.
Thank you very much. This is Carrie. To continue your discussion about sound, I was wondering, how did you in particular pick that sense? Like, why not touch or taste or smell or some other sense? I was just wondering, how did you, was it maybe because of logistics, or if there was another reason?
That's yes, that will be probably the same the next step. But we already have some facsimile for people to touch, especially for people who are not able to see, so they can have access. So all our exhibition are with this kind of object, when these people can have access to what we try to do. And smell also, yes, people have tried to do it. It's not easy, because we have tried in one exhibition, and it turned very uncomfortable after a few few weeks of use, because it's not stable at all. But it's interesting. I think there's a lot of things to be developed like that, and sound is probably most easier way to try to touch on intangible heritage.
Is there another question? Maybe we'll take the two questions.
Thank you. Ooh, geez. Thank you for that wonderful presentation. Could I ask about your repository? A bit more boring question. You mentioned 15% of the collection gets rotated annually. So where's your kind of storage? And you collect, I'm sure. Do you think about running out of storage? Sorry, very logistical question. Yeah, I'm just curious. Yeah, thank you.
Maybe we'll take the other question first, and then we can tackle the two questions together. The lady at the back, thank you.
Thank you for the wonderful lecture. I'm Sona. For the first part of the presentation, I got reminded of an author who once wrote, most of Britain's history was outside Britain. A lot of it is never taught in British schools. So taking parallels from there, would you say then that museums like Branly are places to visit French history for the French people?
Well, I'll start with the second one. Yes, of course, and especially colonial history, which has never been taught in French school. And the colonial history is still a kind of a difficult question sometimes. And I mentioned the exhibition we had on this 1931 to 33 expedition to Africa, from Senegal to Djibouti, the cross all over Africa, bringing a lot of information, objects, animal, and so on. And the most difficult thing was not to talk about it, but was to have access to private archives, because the people didn't want us to use their archives in a critical way. Their expectation from a national museum was to say how big and how important were their grandparents or great grandparents. They didn't want us to say, okay, they did very interesting things, but at the same time, it was a period where you were able to do very bad things with a big umbrella above your head. And maybe today we have to put a bit of light on it. And for this exhibition, for instance, where we try to also give names and faces to local people, because they were, during this exhibition or expedition, or last for 3 years, there were only 7 people from Paris, 1 lady, and 100 of Africans around. And all the works were made by the African, translating, understanding the question, translating the best way, and then retranslating in different languages. And they were never credited for that. They knew, they have photos of them, but when they came back in the official report, they were just Bambara type. They were West African type. There was no names, no individuality. So we make a lot of research on it and try to give back the identity to these people who are really part of our heritage today, which is a part of this exhibition. There's a wonderful heritage of knowledge, but the knowledge was made by this interaction between these 7 people and the local populations. And I mentioned one lady. She's on no photograph from this period. This lady appeared on. There's only men. That's very interesting too. And the only photograph was available from her. She was an anthropologist at the same level as the others, but she's not on the official photos of this big expedition. And this family got the only photo of her, and we had to draw a portrait after what we have seen on the photo, because they didn't want us to use the archives. So yes, the history is something you have to work on, because for these people who are heirs of colonial anthropologists or administrator, there's this strong tension between the family and the historical status of these people. So we have to do more, but most of the people now in France have a very few knowledge about what is colonial history, because when you think of colonial history, you think of Africa or Oceania or Asia during the 19th century. But in fact, it started in the 17th century. Remember that before being Canada and United States, it was 2 different colonies from France, from the French Nouvelle France, which is now Canada, and the Louisiana was French. And we did a very interesting work with this object we have of this period, with the heirs of these different communities of still living in United States or Canada. And there is now at the Versailles Palace an exhibition on this we organize to remember also that the colonial history can be a very old history. Nobody knows about it, but it lasts for several hundred years, and there's no more knowledge of it. So yes, the museum is also there through the objects to dig up some of the history. Sometimes we don't really want to know what happened, but we should be aware that we should know. We should learn from that, because it's also a way to respect the history. We can't change it. There's no possibility to change anything. Our only possibility is to know and transmit, and be able to make the transmission to the next generation. This is how we are as human beings. It happened this way, and it's still happening today, in fact. Yes, sorry, I'm a bit long on this, but the other one is on storeroom. That's the big question for a museum. And because we have 2, most of the collection is underneath the museum, because this museum is new, as I mentioned. So it was really designed to be a museum. That's why it's easier to develop a museum in this kind of building than at the Louvre, where it was a palace. It wasn't designed like you have here. It's a historical building. Sometimes you want to get rid of a wall, to get it. Impossible. But in the museum, well, we can't do also such a strong way. But there's a lot of flexibility in the way it was designed. And we have another facility we store for big objects, big canoes, sometimes things like that, in another location. And the question is that we still acquire. This museum acquire about 1,000 objects every year. It can be a photo, it can be huge color carving, it can be different things. And about, I would say, between 1,000 to 1,040, 400. And 60% of them comes from donations, from people giving the object to a museum. Because this national museum, it's a very specific French uh, thing. That's we museum, like the Musée du quai Branly, do not own the collection. The collection are owned by the nation. And so we are just a custodian. And that's why when you are French and you want, after 2, 3, generally 4 generation, your link with your ancestor begins to blur. But you want it to be part of the nation history. So you give to a national museum these objects. And this is how this collection was made for several hundred years now. And we sometimes we acquire on auction and galleries and so on. But the majority of the collection, I say 60 and sometimes 65% every year, comes from citizens who want to give something to be part of this nation history.
It's a very similar concept with at the national level museums in Singapore as well. We are, although it says collection of the Asian civilization, collections of National Gallery of Singapore, but ultimately they are all sort of collectively known as the national collection. I mean, the museums, the galleries are just custodians of taking care of this collection. So on that note, we are again very similarly in terms of the structure wise. Maybe we have time for. I'll take two questions. Sorry, maybe I'll go with Tim first.
Thanks very much. That was a very interesting presentation, and it reminded me of my wandering around the Louvre, Abu Dhabi, in terms of also the attempt to flatten out civilizational hierarchies that defined in the 19th century, and think about that within a broader landscape of the heritage diplomacy that's playing out between France and the Gulf states. And then but then also that means is when you walk around that museum, you are left with a kind of juxtaposition of different regions, different objects, different cultural traditions, etc., that problematize any simple narratives that civilization museums and culture museums have traditionally relied upon. The centers of Egyptian culture along the Nile, Chinese National Ceramics Museum will tell a story of the progression of technology, kilns, so on and so forth, that we tell that we learn about civilizational progress, decline, centers, periphery, so on and so forth. With your flat and open ambition, where does narrative go for you? What stories can you tell with that? And do you rely on the conventional stories that have oriented public education? Or do you want to upset a lot of those? Where you know, my question is essentially about the narrative. What do you do with the objects to tell narratives that are tied to place, power, and those types of things?
Maybe we take the last question from the lady at the back. Yes, and then I'm sorry about that.
My question is actually about zombies and Bruce Lee. Because I caught those two posters, and they're both, I would say, have a deep cult following among also the younger generation as well as the older fans of Bruce Lee. And zombies, I know recently, in the last few years, the Koreans have been making a lot of zombie movies, which have a great following. So I just wanted to know how you relate this to what you have in your collection.
Thank you. So for the narrative, of course, there's many people also organizing a visit in the museum. So you can be alone, but if you come with a classroom or if you want to be with a guided tour, you have these people who are able to build the narratives. I would say that the narratives comes with exhibition, temporary exhibition, where you can focus on something specific and you can give much more information. And that's why I have this small poster of all the kind of the exhibition we have. I mentioned the one we have at the Versailles Palace at the moment, which is a long scientific project made from our collection from the 17th and 18th century from the former French colony in Canada and in Mississippi. This has been a long work with the Seneca and so many communities now working, still living in these places. And that was very interesting because we can go back to the history for the French audience of remember, we have a connection with this place, its history, but we should know. And we were able to dig out a lot of archives from that time. Some of them weren't open. Still, the French sold the Louisiana to the United States. So that was a very interesting thing. At the same time, you have this discussion with the people who are the heirs of that time, and they have their own vision of it. And that was very interesting. And instead of talking about the whole history of Nouvelle-France, French Louisiana, we just focus on 3 years when the king of France, Louis XV, invited to France the chiefs from Mississippi. And we have a lot of very interesting small stories to talk about it because they were received as ambassador. They were taken to theater. They were taken to kill animals with the king and so on. That was very interesting thing. Nobody knows about him. It was so far away. It was in 1725. But it was very interesting because by a very specific and small history, you can touch a lot of things. And I think this is how the temporary exhibition is so important for your museum, where you can't touch everything. You're just trying to focus, like the one I was mentioning about the French expedition in Africa. It's only 3 years. But in 3 years, so many documents and so many things you can touch on. So that's, I think, how we relate the history narrative and a global historical vision. And the last question was for the zombie and Bruce Lee. Yeah, this is the way also, this is also part of the question, of the answer I want to make. Thank you for that. Because it's a way also to connect the cultural heritage with a younger audience, which may not be able to make the link between the Korean zombie film and the zombie and the object we have at the museum, some of them from the 18th and 19th century. Because, for the zombie, for instance, we have worked with our colleague from Haiti, the director of the National Museum of National Bureau National de l'Ethnologie, National Bureau of Ethnology, because he's the director of the Haitian main museum, but he's also a high priest in Vodou, and also touching the question of zombie. And zombie is a very interesting thing because everybody knows the word zombie. We talk about zombie um, computers and sort of thing like that. So zombie in the Busan, the last train to Busan with the zombie inside and so on. And in fact, it's a very interesting, again, it's a very small story and very linked with a very narrow territory. This is Haiti. It's not Saint Domingo on the same island of Hispaniola. It didn't appear in San Domingo. It appeared on the other side where what is now Haiti. And zombie is an African name, but at the same time, it's probably the connection between the local Taino Aboriginal culture, the African culture, and also the Western culture, with a mix with the Christian religion and so on. So that was a way to make the link between the last train to Busan to the zombie objects we have from this time, and the same thing with Bruce Lee.
I mean, we had this chat over lunch yesterday as well. Beyond from popular culture to the very traditional culture, it's also how we treat the word, the term today, right? I mean, sometimes like at the end of the day, maybe like now, it's like, oh, I'm so tired. I feel like a zombie, you know. So on that note, please join me to thank President of the Musée du quai Branly, Emmanuel Kasarhérou. And we wish you, your colleagues, and Musée du quai Branly a very smooth travel and successful opening in Chengdu in China.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you to everyone.